All right, welcome to Brighter Retirement Radio. Today we have a great conversation with Jake Dayton, who is a Medicare specialist and self-proclaimed Medicare nerd. I'm really excited for our conversation today about Medicare transitions. As a retirement consultant, it's the number one concern or worry that I get with clients that come through my doors because they're always worried about that transition. They don't have enough knowledge yet to worry about the actual insurance, but the transition is usually the scary part. So Jake, welcome to our studio today.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful.
Glad to be here.
Nice. Well, today our conversation is, like I mentioned, around Medicare transitions. And I could not think of a better person to talk to about this because you've had so many years experience working with pre-retirees, retirees moving in and through that Medicare experience. So before we get into that and have that conversation, I would love to hear a little bit about you so our listeners can know who they're actually listening to and why you are so qualified to answer these questions. So a bit about you. What do you want to share?
Well, I'm not from Utah, although that's where I am. I'm actually from Ohio, which surprises a lot of people. I don't see many Ohioans here out west. Born and raised there. I came out to BYU, Brigham Young University here in Utah. And I've been here ever since. Haven't found a good reason to leave. So here I am still. Originally, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And the closer and closer I got to graduating, just didn't feel right about it. I knew there's certain things I loved about doctors and what they did. The fact that they were able to work with people and basically receive immediate gratification from what they've done. They can immediately see somebody walks into their office, and when they leave, there's a difference. People walk out of that office feeling better. And that was really special to me to be able to see that with people. That's something I wanted. I knew I wanted something where I could meet with somebody. They walk in, they walk out in a better situation. Although I didn't go down the route of a doctor, I started exploring a lot of different things, went into the direction of sales and marketing, where I was able to interact with a lot of people, which I love to do. And I was able to see that same experience. Through all the different things I did, I kind of finally ended up with working with the senior population, primarily focusing in Medicare. And I can really probably sum it up in one word, why? Impact.
What do you mean by that?
What I do for people of, I guess you could say, my generation versus seniors, there's just a lot more stress. There's a lot more feeling of a need for help with seniors. It's so overwhelming, this retirement transition. All the things they've got to think about. They hear that Medicare is something that's not just optional, it's required at one point or another. And that's true. When you start talking about requirements and penalties, that starts to freak people out a little bit. And so people are coming not knowing, given all the different sources, all the different voices coming at them, wondering what they need to do. When I, with a simple sit down or conversation with them, can help them understand it's not as bad as you think. The feeling of relief on their faces, it's again, the feeling of when they walk in to meet with me versus once they've left, complete different feeling. It's like a burden has been lifted from their shoulders. So that's kind of why I love focusing with the Medicare population. It's appreciated. There's a need for it, and there's a big value in it. And with baby boomers coming around, it's nonstop. I mean, it's getting more and more of a need for people as there's more and more people encountering this transition. So originally, I started is what's called a captive agent, right? I started with a specific company, Humana, that you may have heard of. Fortune 500 company, very big, very solid. I heard they train their agents well, and that's what I wanted. I wanted good training right from the start, and I got it. I had a good experience with Humana for a year, but it didn't take long to realize that being limited in my ability to only offer one company's products or solutions, it didn't put me in the position I needed to be unbiased with people. When I was talking with people, offering them the solution that I really felt was best for them, it's not always going to be Humana, right? There's not always one company that fits all. And so after about a year of a very successful time there at Humana, a lot of people thought I was crazy for leaving. I left. I left the health insurance, the retirement benefits, the salary, everything to go off on my own and become an independent broker. To me, it was completely worth it because the moment I became an independent broker, I could represent every option, every company. So when I sat down with somebody, I knew that I could have some solution for them, that we could figure out what was truly best for their situation.
And that being a difference maker that you had shared initially, you were better positioned to do that as an independent as opposed to just being in one company. And that's powerful because as our audience listens to this, I hope they realize how important that is for them, right? Here we are talking about Jake Dayton, but for those that are actually experiencing the transition into Medicare, that's very powerful. And if they really understood that, they would gain so much more value from talking with you because they know that they're being represented in their best interest, not necessarily a biased point. So thanks for sharing that. I think that's an important part as we lead in today's conversations to understand kind of where you've gone through. But now you own your own Medicare firm, retirement consulting solutions firm.
Yeah, Live Well Retirement Solutions. Yeah.
Live Well Retirement Solutions, and are making a difference. I love that's kind of what your aim is. So as we talk about our conversation today, as we thought through our listeners and what would be very valuable on the Medicare front, obviously I did not want this to be a podcast about this product, this deductible, this one.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness, right? Because it changes every year anyway. This would be outdated really quick. However, one thing that is so consistent in this arena is the experience that folks have when they are turning 65 and then have to deal with Medicare, and then consistently beyond 65, they also have to make transitions potentially into a different coverage with different needs as their health changes and different prescriptions. So what I wanted to talk about today and get to your insight on is these transitions into and through Medicare. What does that look like? What does the average retiree expect to go through, or what should they expect to go through? Later on in the episode, we'll talk about how they can prevent some of these experiences. But what does that really look like, Jake, that you see every day?
The transition process is the big stress causer, right? When you're going from a certain way of having done things to a completely new way of doing things, you have no experience, you haven't read books, that's not your area of profession. How in the world are you supposed to know, right? And when it comes to Medicare, with the things people hear, it can be stressful, again, because there's so many different sources of things telling you need to do this or you need to do that. But then on the other side, there's fluff, there's advertisements, there's things people are trying to sell you, and they're very different. One thing that is certain, unfortunately, in this world of Medicare, the one big consistency of Medicare is change. How things do change over time. But there are certain things you can count on. When you were first new to Medicare, it is not a very fun situation to be in. You're like a celebrity, but in a bad way. The paparazzi's after you.
Expand on that. What does that mean? That's interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's a stressful time where you're getting phone calls every day. Some people, multiple calls per day. I've had clients where, just for curiosity's sake, I've told them, hang on to every piece of mail you get leading up to turning 65 when you're first eligible for Medicare. Hang on to all the mail you get, all the stuff you get. I've had people where they've had a stack of mail over half a foot high of all the stuff they've received. Amongst that pile of stuff, how are you supposed to figure out what's what? Even if somebody could, where are you going to find the time to do that? To find the time to read every single one of those things, and you have one thing saying this, another saying that. There's opinion versus fact, right? One company's going to say, well, we're the best. Well, what about us? We're the best. So you've got all this conflicting information, but on top of that, you're getting phone calls of people saying you got to do this or that now. If you don't, you're going to be penalized. So there's just a lot of things happening all at once that you've never had to deal with before. It used to be that I could talk with somebody about 2-3 months in advance before they turned 65. And we could discuss everything we needed to discuss. They weren't getting bombarded by so much stuff. We live in a time now where people are starting to get hit with stuff, mail, phone calls, things like that, a year in advance, 9 months in advance, where they're already getting all this information, starting to wonder, well, do I need to do something now? If so, what do I need to do? How do I need to do it? When do I need to do it? And so it's become a process where I've even had to change what I do a little bit and adapt, because people are getting overwhelmed and nervous sooner. So we're now having to address people's needs, answer their questions, and meet with them sooner. It's not so much a 2-month process anymore in advance. It's far, far in advance.
Let me pause you really quick. So This time period that you're talking about, before they turn the age of 65, they start to get a lot of mail. How much of this is actually coming from Medicare? And how much is this just advertisements? Really, the question I'm getting at is how much of all of this mail that they're getting do they really, really need to pay attention to?
Well, if you're talking about a specific insurance company's materials, you can recognize any one company probably, right? And recognize it as an insurance company. You know that they're probably just trying to sell you something. But then there are certain sources which you know are government, CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Social Security, right? These main governmental things. The challenge is you'll get some of that. You'll even receive books. Every year, people, even on Medicare, get a book called Medicare and You. I've had people read that book and come out of it more confused. This book that's meant to help people understand. And Social Security, Medicare, if you call and talk to them, they can't recommend any one particular company or option for you. They're a government entity. They're unbiased, thank goodness. But it leaves you in a position where you're wondering, well, I've heard about Medicare, but I've also heard about this additional coverage you need to get in addition to your Medicare, because if you don't get that, you're left pretty financially exposed, which is true to a certain extent. So there's just a lot of moving parts. There's kind of steps. There's your Medicare you've got to worry about when you turn 65 and transitioning and timing it properly. So you're starting to apply for the Medicare at the right time. But then in addition to that, you've got this extra coverage, people call it supplemental coverage or secondary coverage, that you often want to get with your Medicare to make the coverage better. How do you just establish a difference between the two, right? You can read it all, you can read stacks of stuff, but there's a reason why someone like me exists. This has become so complicated. People get so much stuff, so many calls, so much materials, that you have an entire profession based around helping people simplify that.
Okay. So if I hear you correctly, within the year before you turn 65, you're going to get a lot of mail. Some of it's from insurance companies, some of it's from government agencies that you need to pay attention to as well.
But again, even then it's left so vague, it's not incredibly helpful.
So if I hear you correctly, right, your role as a Medicare agent is really to distill down to the simple, actionable items that really need to be paid attention to. Is that right?
What matters?
Yeah.
What's fluff versus what matters?
Right. So that's extremely valuable. I can see why you making a difference and walking out of an appointment feeling like you made a difference actually happens most likely every appointment, because you're having folks that are experiencing this transition in their life with lots of options, lots of confusion, with not a lot of specific laser direction on what they should do. So you step into the picture, you help them understand the timing of that, the transition of that, what they can throw away and what they should keep. Is that right?
Oh, we'll do that sometimes when we sit down with people. They've got their stack. You can sift through. I mean, literally what they've been worrying about for months can be sifted through in about 5 minutes when you know what to look for. So
Jake, are you telling me you're a professional mail sorter?
Yeah, it's one of my specialties.
Okay,
one of my talents.
Nice. I'd like to see that in action. See how fast you can be sorting through the mail for your clients.
It's impressive. I should video it sometime.
Right. So we're still on the question of what does transition look like? What are people experiencing? So you'd mentioned you're several months before you turn 65. You're getting a lot of mail. As that date approaches, what does that transition look like?
Well, and that kind of leads into one of the more common mistakes that people do make as they make that transition. It's a timing issue. Okay, when you're first new to Medicare, you have what's called your IEP, your initial election period, that goes from 3 months before the month of your 65th birthday, the month of your 65th birthday, and up to 3 months after is the time when you can transition onto Medicare. And you can do so without having to answer any health questions, depending on the type of policy you get with your Medicare. The challenge people run into, one of the common mistakes, is just putting it off. People kind of take the ostrich approach, right? Just bury your head in the sand and hope that everything that needs to happen will happen. Hey, if it's government, if it's required, well, everything's going to fall into place as it should. And that is most often not the case, actually, more often than not. And so you've got this period 3 months before you turn 65, which is when we want to be taking action, when we want to be sitting down and planning for the transition of enrolling onto Medicare. Medicare, what we call original Medicare from the government, is composed of two parts, Part A and Part B. Part A is your hospital coverage. Part B is your Medicare, or excuse me, your doctor coverage, or medical coverage as they call it. So Part A and Part B. You want to be enrolling in that 3 months in advance. I've had clients wait till a month in advance because they've ignored things and they finally had enough and they're like, okay, let's figure out what this is all about. Doing it a month before you turn 65 can put you in an unfortunate situation sometimes. The part you can do doesn't take a long time. That's the good news. But unfortunately, there's a certain portion of this process that's left in the hands of the government and you have no control over that. Once you've done your part, submit an application, do what you need to do, and that application has been sent over to the government, to Social Security, to be processed, good luck. At that point, all you can do is wait and hope that they process it accordingly, that it doesn't get lost in the thousands of applications they receive every month. And that's sometimes where people run into trouble. They wait too late before that period leading up to 65, where it's a little too close, and sometimes because of delays, by no control of their own, things don't happen or get processed, or they don't get a response until after they've turned 65, going months afterwards, until sometimes they fall out of that initial election period. Now, having said that, there's a certain situation where if somebody's working, it can take away a little bit of that stress, where there's not certain things that have to be done right at that point when they turn 65. But I mean, we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
If you want to go down that road.
So if they're going into this transition, your recommendation is 3 months before they turn 65 is like their sit down, start making some decision.
Mm-hmm. Planning with their employer, talking with human resources about certain things that need to be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they, a couple months before they turn 65, they start making some decisions either by themselves or with an agent, with their employer, start organizing that, submit the application in that time window. From when the time you submit the application, how long of processing time do they have? You kind of smile because there's probably a lot of delay and variability with the government, but what have you seen?
It's frustrating even for me, given that I do this for a living. Yeah, how frustrating it is that there's a certain part we just don't have control over. We are dependent on the government to do their job, and government isn't always known for their speed or efficiency in things, right? Unfortunately, people may have experienced that. So, yeah, I mean, it can absolutely happen where things do get delayed, or if it doesn't get done properly. There's a certain part. For a lot of people, there's a difference between enrolling in Medicare and enrolling in Social Security. A lot of people think those have to be done together. And most often now these days, I see those are actually done separately. A lot of people are wanting to work until they're, for a lot of people right now is their full retirement at 66, and yet they're eligible for Medicare at 65. Mm-hmm. And so it's making sure you're enrolling in just the Medicare when you go to the Social Security site to enroll in Medicare, because you do that on the Social Security site, not the Medicare site.
Interesting.
But at the same time, you want to make sure if you're not ready yet, you're not enrolling accidentally in Social Security at the same time because you're on the same website. Interesting
mistake. And that's interesting that they have that on the same site. You'd think that they would separate that for clarity.
Well, yeah, you would think.
You would think, right?
The government we're dealing with,
right?
And in addition to that, I mean, there's certain parts that need to be enrolled in, right? People hear about these Medicare penalties, right? And if things aren't done the right way, you have these penalties as well. Timing is one thing. If you don't time it right, then you don't have certain parts of Medicare when you're supposed to, and you get penalized. But above and beyond just the Medicare A and B, where you could have penalties, there's another part of Medicare that runs people into problems called Part D of Medicare. And Part D is your drug coverage. And the reason that runs a lot of people into problems is because Part D is not offered by the government. It's not Part A or B, what we call original Medicare. You get that from private insurance companies. And Part D is required, whether somebody's taking prescriptions or not. Medicare doesn't care whether you think you need drug coverage or not. They simply care that you have it. So for a lot of people, they run into the problem of when they first get onto Medicare, they say, oh, I'm healthy. I'm not taking any prescriptions. Why would I get a drug plan? Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter whether you think you need it. It matters that you have it.
And so that kind of leads me into this question. What are some of the common mistakes that are made during that transition initially to Medicare for the first time, for all those first-time filers? I want you to share a little bit more about that Part D penalty, because I've come across it many times before, and every time I do, my heart hurts, because it's not just a one-time penalty, right? This is a lifetime penalty.
It does not go away.
Oh my goodness. Do you have any examples that you've come across that people have delayed, and what does that look like?
And funny enough, yeah, when you talk about common mistakes made in this transition, that is one of the big two. Part D is one of them. Simply because, unlike Part A and Part B, Part D is something you've got to do on your own. I mean, even A and B to a certain extent, yeah, you still got to do some things. But Part D is completely through private insurance companies, not with the government. Government has to approve, CMS has to approve these Part D plans. But you've got to get it on your own. It's up to your initiative to say, oh, I need to go find a drug plan. Obviously, if you're not taking a lot of prescriptions, you'd want to get a drug plan that's very inexpensive, that just meets the requirement of having a drug plan. If you don't, okay, drug plans came into existence in 2006. So fortunately, somebody's not going to be penalized anytime prior to 2006 if they've been on Medicare a really long time. But if you look at the maximum amount, this past open enrollment, which we'll probably talk about here in a bit, I ran into a client who is healthy, still healthy, thank goodness, not taking any prescriptions, but they're getting into their 80s now, still no prescriptions. They have no Part D coverage. They didn't feel they had a need. And so I had to have this fun conversation that I do with people sometimes, where you say, okay, I'm going to be the bearer of bad news. Doesn't necessarily have to be this way. You have a choice one way or another. You have the ability to stop this Part D penalty from growing bigger and bigger every year. It's not just every year, it's every month that you continue to not have Part D when you are eligible to have it. You'll continue to have this penalty increase. So it's a monthly thing. Okay, so you have basically 12 increases per year, okay, that you're going to see this continue to grow. If somebody this year in 2020 has not had drug coverage since 2006, right, when it was first required, you're going to have a penalty that is about 1% of the national average cost of a Part D drug plan. That changes every year, but assuming, because it's been pretty close to around...
Simplify that for our listeners. What is...
Assuming the national average cost of a Part D drug plan is around $34. It's hovered around the low 30s, okay? About $34 a month for a Part D drug plan. You're paying 1% of that, or 34 cents, okay, for every month you don't have Part D when you're supposed to.
Oh my goodness.
34 cents doesn't sound that bad. And it's all relative. For some people, when they see their big ultimate penalty of 34 cents times the number of months that they haven't had Part D, some people don't feel like it sounds that bad. But others say, well, why in the world am I going to pay $30 to $50 a month for the rest of my life that I don't have to pay if it can be avoided, if it's just set up right from the start?
So what you're telling me is 34 cents a month that you didn't have it, times that by however many months. So if we're going back years, 10 years, that really adds up. So you had mentioned this potentially $30 to $50 a month would be your Part D penalty?
It's closer to around 50 and above, 50 plus if you've had Part D since 2006 and haven't had it until now, 2020, you're more like $55 plus per month for the rest of your life.
$55 a month for a retiree, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Not to mention that it never goes away. That's not a yearly thing. It's a monthly thing.
Yikes. Okay.
So it's very costly not knowing simply what you were supposed to do, right?
So this client that you met with during this open enrollment, you had this conversation, and what was the outcome? So you're leaving me hanging here, Jake.
You've got options. You've got two options. So they can continue to go without drug plans. So they don't have this penalty until they activate their Part D. If they continue to go without Part D the rest of their life, they will never actually activate the penalty. They'll never officially have to start paying it. My job as an insurance agent, though, as a broker, is to say, what in the world are you thinking? Not having coverage for the just in case. Because this has also happened with clients I've had where all of a sudden life happens, you get older, your body starts doing things it wasn't doing before, which you don't have a lot of control over sometimes. And all of a sudden you need to take a prescription that is so far out of reach cost-wise, you can't afford it unless you have a drug plan. So at that point, you do start a drug plan. You turn on a drug plan, which, mind you, you can only do that during certain times of the year as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So suppose you come into needing a drug in the beginning of the year, January, April, June, whatever, and that drug Unfortunately, to be able to get a drug plan, you can't enroll in that till later in the year during open enrollment. So if you've got to take that drug, you're paying whatever cost for it out of your own pocket without insurance until you can even enroll in the plan later during open enrollment that year, but that doesn't even start until January of the following year. So you could be months and months, possibly a full year before you actually get coverage on that drug, even if you decide you want to get the drug plan.
That's scary. And let me give you a little bit of a reference. I know for a fact, I have a client who pays the out-of-pocket cost for a drug, and it's $1,500 a month. Now, I think that's a lot. He thinks that's a lot, but I actually even know that's could be low for some of these prescription medications as well. So, I mean, when we talk about retirement finance and planning, this is why I kind of stop Jake and talk and emphasize this point. If you don't have a drug plan and you're stuck in that scenario and you can't turn it on for 6 months later, I mean, that could snowball really quick to affect your financial income plan, right? Running out of money sooner than later because of a misstep or a mistake with transitioning into or through Medicare. So now that's option one, right? In this case that I gave this client. Option two is we put you on a drug plan for the first time since you've been on Medicare. We actually start your Part D, okay? What that does then is activate your penalty. You're going to get a letter in the mail from CMS saying, hey, it looks like you're getting on drug coverage and you haven't had drug coverage ever since 2006 when you were eligible. And so they'll give you an opportunity in that letter to say if you've had any other type of coverage. If from the time you were eligible for Medicare and when you finally start Part D, you had some other type of coverage, what we call a creditable coverage, meaning a coverage is good as or better than Medicare, then that will help reduce your penalty a bit. Like if somebody has TRICARE for Life or VA or has had work coverage, okay, those exempt you from the penalty. Those are a creditable coverage where maybe some of those years you had, some work coverage. Maybe starting in 2006, let's say maybe they still had work coverage for at least 10 of those years till 2016. So really they haven't had Part D, for all these years, but really up to 2016, they did. They had it through an employer or a retiree coverage. Well, instead of having 14 years of penalty, now they only have 4 years of penalty, right? Because it's only from 2016 in this example to 2020 that they officially had no drug coverage at all, even creditable coverage. So it's going to lessen the penalty a little bit, right? But my advice to somebody is always going to be, without reservation, don't continue to take a chance and not have drug coverage. You don't know when the time comes when you'll need the drug coverage. Start on a Part D drug plan. Stop your penalty from continuing to grow month after month after month. And you'll have drug coverage as well. So number one, you stop the penalty from getting bigger and bigger, but then you'll also have drug coverage just in case. And the example of your client paying $1,500 a month, I mean, maybe you ask the average person whether they'd rather pay $1,500 a month for a drug or would they rather pay, at the worst, maybe a $55, $60 penalty a month. Mm-hmm. Which would you rather have? I think the answer is pretty clear.
Yeah.
So we talked about the mistakes going into the initial part of transition through Medicare.
And there's one other thing I should mention, yeah.
So that was the Part D. That was number one mistake. So thank you for sharing that one. I'm glad we caught that one. What is the next mistake?
This is common. It doesn't have necessarily the devastating effects that the Part D mistake does, but overall, cost savings-wise over the years, over someone's financial retirement can make a difference. A lot of people, when they're working, or a lot of them will continue to work past 65, they'll talk to their employer and say, hey, well, can I stay just on my work coverage, past 65? And their work will say, sure, you can, as long as you work, you can hang on to your work coverage, right? Which is true for most people. You'll have some employers that will say, no, once you turn 65, we're kicking you off. We want you going on to Medicare. But a lot of them will say, no, you can stay on as long as you want. And unfortunately, that is what a lot of people do. And that may come as a surprise to people. But until you know how the Medicare coverage works, when you get the combination of Medicare with the secondary coverage with it, when you understand how good that coverage is, a lot of people years after they've continued working, I talked to a guy in Cedar Hills here locally a couple weeks ago. He's 73, 74. He's had his work coverage all of this time. And come to find out, he finally decides to go to one of these meetings, and I make contact with him. And come to find out, he could have been saving hundreds of dollars a month if he had, at 65 years old, opted into the Medicare option for his health insurance instead of staying on his work coverage.
Ouch.
Hundreds, thousands of dollars lost over the years paying for coverage that's not even as good as what he could have had through Medicare. So what I often tell people is the biggest mistake, unfortunately, made in Medicare is assuming that what you have is good enough.
I could see how in a lot of areas that could be detrimental. Just making the assumption that where you're at is the best place to be, particularly, and we'll talk about this here in a minute, but particularly because the Medicare and healthcare environment is ever changing. Absolutely every year, sometimes month to month. Maybe not your exact coverage, but doctors and prescription costs. There's a lot of changes that happen. So assuming that you're good where you're at is kind of dangerous, right? It's essentially what you're saying.
Well, I would say dangerous, even more so. What might ring more with people, resonate with people, is costly. What are you unnecessarily throwing out in costs that you don't have to be? Right? Had you just compared your options? Because there's one thing for sure, you cannot take advantage of what you're not aware of. Right? That's what I kind of tell my clients all the time. Let's at least make you aware of your options. Sometimes I'll sit down with people and we'll determine that their work coverage is better than what they can get through Medicare. Great. At least we compared. At least we know.
And at least you got that peace of mind that you're in a good place for now.
That you checked your options versus 10 years later, it's like, boy, I was paying $500 a month when I could have been paying $130 a month for better coverage.
Oh, okay.
So you've got to take the time to compare. So that's what I do as people are kind of closing in on this transition time of being eligible for Medicare at 65, taking the time to sit down and compare. What do you have versus what could you have?
Perfect. So thank you. So to this point, we've talked about the transition into 65, so transition into Medicare, what that looks like. And then we talked a little bit about a few of the common mistakes. Now I would love to talk about the transition, continual transition, if you would, as they go through Medicare year after year. Now, why does that have to be a transition is what I would love to have you address. And with that, what's this open enrollment, and why should we be talking about that and sharing information about that transition that happens year after year?
Yes, the notorious open enrollment. For those that have been on Medicare for a while, they know there's a lot of hype built up around open enrollment. It's the one time of the year when you have the ability to change your Medicare coverage from one plan to another. And right now, that's from October 15th to December 7th. Okay, that's what we call the AEP, the annual election period. Okay, there are exceptions to that. There might be other times during the year where someone can change their coverage. And if they have what's called an SEP, a special election period.
Who's an SEP for?
If people that meet certain conditions that give them an exception to the rule of having to do it during the regular open enrollment period. Great examples of that would be if you have a financial status change, become eligible for Medicaid, or all of a sudden lose Medicaid status, or other certain financial statuses, even besides Medicaid. There are others called low income subsidy that they can receive, where they're not quite fully eligible for Medicaid, but still get help paying for prescriptions, things like that. Or if you move from one place to another. There are a lot of people here locally that might go on a service mission for their church, right? When they go from one place to another, they'll have a special enrollment period to get on a different plan in that different area. Even though it might not be during the regular open enrollment period.
And that's not from city to city. That's like a different state.
Yeah.
State to state where plans are different.
Yeah, the designated terminology is service area. Each of these plans you can get with your Medicare only work in a certain service area. Okay. If you leave that service area, you are actually eligible to get on a plan, change plans to another area. For a lot of people, that means even if they change service area from here in the Wasatch Front to St. George is a change of service area.
Interesting. So not necessarily state to state, but it could be regions of a state.
Correct.
That have different hospital networks, doctor networks, service.
Correct. Areas. So I only say that to say, yes, there are other opportunities besides just open enrollment where somebody could change during the year. But for the majority of people, if you're going to make a change, it's going to be during AEP, the annual election period. During that time, You can make as many switches as you want, which sounds kind of crazy.
I did not know that, actually.
Yeah, somebody can make a switch during a plan. They have buyer's remorse, or they come across something they feel like may be better. Whatever the final enrollment is that they've chosen before December 7th, right? That is when that's basically what locks in as of January 1st. But it doesn't matter whether you enroll in a plan on October 15th or December 7th. Either way, it's still not going to take effect until January 1st. That's when the change takes effect. There's a lot of hype around it because, again, that's the only time you can make a change. The big mistake I come across with people during open enrollment is often the same. It's the same mistake people make when they're first new to Medicare is, hey, what I've got is working. If it's not broken, don't fix it. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. That's great, but the problem is you don't know what is changing going into the next year. So it's a 50-50 shot that it's going to be good in the long run, because there are two things that determine whether a plan is good for somebody. Two big things. They're doctors. They have certain doctors they're attached to, and prescriptions, the drugs they're taking. Those change from year to year. The networks change. Hospitals go in and out of network. Doctors go in and out of network. Doctors drop certain plans and quit accepting other plans and whatever it may be, right? I've had people where they do absolutely nothing during open enrollment, and all of a sudden next year they go to their doctor and they have to pay the full amount out of their own pocket because their doctor is no longer accepting the plan that they thought was just fine. Even bigger than that though, okay? Because people can find new doctors and still get the job done. For a lot of people, the more costly result, unfortunately, is the drugs, right? Where they have a certain prescription they're taking. I can give an example. When I met with a client, it probably would be about 2 years ago now, that was taking a simple prescription called Zolpidem, the generic for Ambien. That's actually a pretty common one among seniors. On the plan she had, that Zolpidem, which that year we were talking was, it was a tier 2. Okay, on these drug plans, you've got 5 tiers of drugs, right? The higher the tier, the more expensive the cost. So tier 1s and 2s are usually generics, pretty inexpensive. Okay. Her Zolpidem was a tier 2, and that makes sense because Zolpidem is a generic. Okay, so she was paying maybe around $10 for that drug. Had we not changed her by doing a review, that Zolpidem on her very same plan was transitioning to a tier 4 the next year. So it was transitioning from a $10 copay for that drug to a $95 copay. And it's a generic drug.
Incredible.
It just kind of determines from year to year the formulary or list of covered drugs on each plan. It changes. And what the insurance companies worked out in terms of having those drug covered with the pharmaceutical companies, it changes from year to year. And so one drug, just because it's covered a certain way one year, does not mean it will be covered that way the next year. On that one drug alone, we saved my client $85 a month simply because we took the time to look to make sure that all their drugs are still covered.
Wow, that is a big shift. So changes happen all around in the plan, in the prescription drugs, in the government's definition of how they shuffle things up. I'm sure that all adds a lot of changes as well. So for someone transitioning through each year, from your perspective, Jake, what is a healthy way to approach open enrollment every year? Should they approach it with fear and worry? Should they approach it by, I know what your answer is here, but just not caring? What's the medium there, and what would you recommend how they approach that?
As I reach out to my clients this year, this is a reminder that I give them. Fortunately, these insurance companies are required. It's not an optional thing. They're required to send out what's called the annual notice of change book that basically details the changes from one year to the next, what is happening to their plan. They'll usually get that around early October. The best thing somebody can do is not stick their head in the sand and hope it works out okay, but actually look at that book. We call it the ANOC for short, ANOC, Annual Notice of Change book. In there, it will literally detail side by side, 2019 to 2020.
Okay.
Your copay is changing from this to this. For each benefit, line item benefit, it tells you how it is changing. If somebody's happy with their plan, the great news is they don't need to do anything. That's something Medicare got right. They've done well. Nice. If you don't do anything, it will automatically roll over to the next year. They'll get a new insurance card, usually around late December. They'll start using that new insurance card on January 1st, if they do absolutely nothing, okay? But if they look in that ANOC, that book and they don't like what's happening, that's where you talk to your agent and say, I want to explore other options. I don't like what's happening to my plan. Now, sometimes it'll be that every plan's going through some negative changes and the grass is not always greener on the other side. Mm-hmm. But again, just like when you first turn 65 and you're new to Medicare, it doesn't hurt to check. You don't have anything to lose and you stand quite a bit to gain by checking just to be sure. Look at that ENOC book. Just crack it open and spend 5-10 minutes looking at it. Even for somebody that's not insurance savvy, they can look at 2 columns and see how the number is different from one year versus the next year.
Yeah. So during open enrollment, is there any mistakes that might happen during that period? I know we talked about the initial transition into Medicare. Is there any mistakes that you've seen folks make as they transition, maybe change a plan when they didn't understand it, or?
Yeah. The big thing during open enrollment is rash decisions. Like people might come across somebody in a Smith's kiosk, right? Or sitting in a kiosk in a Walmart, right? It's become so much now that almost any retail major place you go into, grocery store wise, you're seeing an agent or somebody sitting at a booth somewhere pulling you in with a quick key phrase to capture your attention or make you panic, saying, oh, did you know your coverage is changing, that it's becoming terrible, right? Whatever they need to do to grab your attention, right?
Right.
And people make the switch. I had a client do that this year. Somebody kind of smooth talked them into doing something else that was actually not in their best interest. Yeah. Another agent sitting at a Smith's kiosk talked to one of my clients and recommended a new plan that they switched to without even looking up their prescriptions to make sure it was a good fit. That happens far too often. In an effort to just be quick and get somebody on their way, hey, let's just make a change real quick for you and send you on your way and get you out of here, get you home. Right? They made the switch. And so my client called me afterwards saying, I'm not sure, Jake, if I enrolled with somebody at a kiosk, can you still be my agent? I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. So that's something that's worth clarifying as well. If you enroll somebody else, whether you like that person or not, whether you know anything about them or not, that person becomes your agent. And so I make sure I tell my clients, if you want me to remain your agent to be able to help you year after year and throughout the year, even before open enrollment, right, during any time of the year, you want to make sure you do that change with me. So this client fortunately called and said, yeah, what happened here? I'm not sure. They didn't ask me anything about my doctors or prescriptions. I said, yeah, we should talk.
Yeah.
We looked up the prescriptions on the plan that she had been switched to, and it was a disaster. I won't go into detail, but they were high tiers, right? On the plan we had her on, which we had her on for a reason, her drugs were tiered lower. A lot of those jumped up from tier 2s to tier 3s, and one of them was even a tier 4.
Wow.
That would have been had she continued with that plan. Again, going back to that rule of whatever your final enrollment is during open enrollment. Fortunately, we just did another enrollment for her and put her right back on what she had before because that was still the best option for her.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I'd tell people, beware of rash decisions. Just because somebody said something that sounded really nice on the spot, call and ask your agent first that has your best interest in mind versus somebody you just met out of the blue at a store or that called you on the phone.
So I had asked you, how should our listeners approach open enrollment? You'd mentioned just make sure you compare the changes. Mm-hmm. You can get that in your ANOC that you get in the mail. Not make rash decisions. What's an appropriate way that they should interact with their agent? Should they, if they have an agent, should they reach out every time? Is it worth a sit down every single year, or is it worth a phone call? What's the best way that they can approach that transition and get that peace of mind that they've checked on where they're at without kind of taking too much time?
There's so many different kind of people out there that approach things different. I mean, I've got clients that are people like engineers that craft a nice fancy spreadsheet every year and they do their own comparison of every single plan.
Oh, wow.
But they still want to run it by me to make sure, hey, this is what I'm thinking, Jake. What do you think of this, right? To people that just call me up on the phone and say, Jake, I like my plan. If there's nothing better out there, I'm fine sticking with what I got. Is there anything better out there, right? It just depends on how somebody approaches it. I reach out to my clients to kind of let them know what's going on with their plan, if there's any major drastic changes, so they're aware that we may want to chat. This was one of those big years where one of the companies was going through major changes, and if clients didn't do anything about it, they were going to go on to a plan, transition automatically to a plan that was double the cost of what they're paying. It was a certain drug plan.
Yikes.
And so if there's major things happening, I'm proactively reaching out to my clients, for example, letting them know these are the specific things that are happening. If it's not drastic changes, I, for example, will leave it to the client to say, hey, are you wanting to make any changes this year? Your plan is not going through any drastic changes for next year. And so if you're happy with it, you'll be fine on the plan for next year. Again, it just depends on the client. I like to reach out to my clients, so it's just not left to chance and they're just worrying all open enrollment as they're hearing commercials and hearing things on the radio, wondering, right? So I like to put their mind at ease right before open enrollment is even getting started. A lot of people will proactively reach out on their own and call their agent as well. 80% of people, frankly, don't care that much and they just don't do much. And so that's why I'm still proactively reaching out to those people to just say, just in case you wanted to know, your plan's going through some major changes. If you don't do anything, it's going to double if that's of interest to you.
Right.
Right? Or it's not going through any major changes. You're welcome to change it if you want. We can look at other options, but it's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
So it depends on the person.
Fair enough.
It's tough to say there's a one size fits all. I like to reach out to all my clients because that's the kind of person I am, to make sure they're aware of what's going on and they're not going into open enrollment blind.
Awesome.
But then some of them will respond and say, yeah, I want to know every little nitty gritty detail. And others say, you know what, if my plan's not getting worse, I want to stick with it.
Keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
So both of these transition experiences, both first time on Medicare and then every year through open enrollment, are important to address. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate your insight and wisdom today as we've talked through some of those. In general, on the topic of Medicare transition, is there any other perspective or advice that you think that we're kind of missing that our listeners would value from?
I just give people an example of, because this is something that very much applies to me, right? I know quite a bit about insurance, I'd like to think, right?
Right.
Medicare insurance, health insurance. I don't know a lot about fixing cars, right?
Okay. Where are you going with this, Jake?
I have no doubt in the world we live in with Google and YouTube, you can read or watch endless videos to learn how to fix a car. But do you want to do it? Do you have the time to do it? If you do it, are you sure 100% that you're going to do it the right way?
Sure.
The reason I mention that, obviously, hopefully you can kind of see where I'm going. Yes, you can probably Google and YouTube and read 3 or 4 or 10 books about the ins and outs of Medicare and how it all works. Do you want to? Do you want to take the time? Do you have the time? I personally believe my time is best spent focusing on insurance and simplifying that for people and helping people with that. And I'd rather spend my time doing that than taking my time to learn how a car works and how to fix a car and how to change my oil from home to save a bit of money versus just taking it to the local mechanic shop. I believe in the idea of specialization, right? Let people do what they're good at. I'll do what I'm good at. We're all better off for it, and we save time and we're going to be better off for it. I believe in this world of Medicare that has become very complicated. It's very helpful and stress relieving if you let somebody help you with that. What's absolutely crazy about what I do is for all the help and consulting I do with people, not just during open enrollment, not just when they first turn 65, but anytime they have questions throughout the year, my clients never pay me a penny. I'm compensated by the insurance companies that I represent. They're the ones paying me. So someone has the ability to have an agent that does this all day long, every day. I eat, sleep, and breathe Medicare, right? Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's not, right?
Right.
But I do it, right? Somebody has the ability to have that access to someone like me and not pay a penny for it. If it costs money, that's something different.
Sure.
So sure, if somebody wants to take the time to learn it all, somebody can become a Medicare expert just like me. I did it, right? I went through all the training to be able to do it myself. But my recommendation to people is keep your life a little more simple. Free up your time to do something else that you might enjoy better or be better at doing. And allow me to help you.
That's powerful. That's, I mean, using your analogy, that's like having a mechanic fix your car for free. You have 2 options on a Saturday morning. You can either take your car down to the shop and have it fixed and pick it up later for dinner and take your wife out to dinner. Or you could spend all Saturday fixing your car and then still go out to dinner, but potentially be a little bit frazzled, frustrated, and tired. Am I hearing you correctly?
I'm just not patient enough of a person
all right.
to be able to do something like. There are people that do that. It's phenomenal. Right. I just feel bad for the people a lot of times that try on their own, and it's just unfortunately very time consuming, and mistakes do still get made. That's why these penalties are so frustrating. People feel
Absolutely.
like they've done it right, and the penalties come back to haunt them later. So we can make sure it gets done right the first time.
Right.
How about that?
Well, Jake, thank you so much for the additional insight and wisdom around the Medicare transitions. That's exactly what I wanted you to be able to share with our listeners. But before we finish, one last question that I ask all of my listeners, and it's personally my favorite part about the podcast, is for you individually, 2 questions. What makes you feel alive, and how do you stay relevant in your life?
Well, there's kind of 2 different categories I look at that, right? Personally and professionally. I mean, professionally, what I thrive on is dealing with people, helping people. What I do is client facing. There's a lot of people, and a lot of it's going in the direction of, hey, do this or that online. You know, you can do this or that, and we just have a phone call. I like sitting down with somebody and having that conversation. If they're not willing, great, we can chat on the phone. But I love that when I talk with somebody and meet them for the first time, it's a business relationship. It's a business transaction. But over time, year after year, as I continue to help them, we develop a relationship, a friendship. I have people that I call friends. I have people that send me birthday cards. I send them birthday cards. I get Christmas presents from people. That's not a clue or a hint. I don't really need any of that, but
Okay.
it's for me, somebody that loves people, it's amazing to see what a relationship can kind of bloom into, right? From somebody you're just starting off as a business relationship, and it becomes personal. They're
so amazing.
They become lifelong friends, and I just thrive on being able to deal with people. There's so many different people in the world, and I get to deal with all of them in what I do. And the other big thing I would say is just, for something that has become as complicated as Medicare, I love to be able to tell people it doesn't have to be complicated. I love simplifying things that are otherwise pretty complicated or difficult to understand, taking it to a level they can understand. Why can I do that? Because I have a simple mind myself. So I kind of like taking things down to kind of the lowest common denominator and helping people understand what they need to understand. And again, it's that feeling of this relieving of a burden that when they first walk in my office versus when they leave, it's a completely different feeling. I get this immediate gratification. Maybe it's selfish in a way, I don't know, but I love seeing people's reaction once they finally understand it clicks. Oh, that's all there is to this. This is all I need to do. Something that seems so complicated doesn't have to be. And they're saying, thank you, Jake. It's just a really good feeling. Right?
So that feeling makes you feel alive, right?
Yeah.
As you walk out. What about personally? What makes you feel alive or stay relevant in your family life or your community?
Well, there's somebody I really respect once that said, love is spelled Time, right? It's spending time with those I love. Family for me is my passion, my everything. What good does it do to experience the things you do in life, to accomplish the milestones you accomplish if you do it alone, as far as I'm concerned, right? I've got a family, I've got a wonderful wife, very patient wife, and 5 kids. And just being able to raise them and figure this out as we go as parents. Our kids range from about 3, almost 4 to 13. So we are a busy little bunch right now. But when I think about, if I wasn't working, what would I be doing? I'd be spending time with my family. And it doesn't have to be anything special. Going to a park, hanging out at home, playing games, whatever it is, I thrive on. What gives me energy is being able to be with my family. And my other little thing I'd have to at least throw it in there is piano. Some people go home and their release is TV. My release is piano. I can put on the headphones on my piano and just kind of get lost in another world. And that gives me energy. It's crazy. It gives me energy. It rejuvenates me. Almost like a spiritual type of thing, right? Where I can kind of get off of my own world and just relax playing piano. I've been playing for a long time. And so that makes me feel alive.
Yeah.
Being able to just kind of be around family, be around piano. And when you talk about what ultimately makes me happy, that's it. That's what I get out of bed for.
Thank you so much for sharing. I did not know that about your piano skills. I feel like for all of us, whether close to retirement, into retirement, it's important for us to stay in that space of feeling alive and relevant in the lives of our family and community. So thanks for sharing that insight.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again, Generally Jake, for this interview. It's been really insightful for our listeners. Those of you at home, I'm sure that you've gained some additional insight, and hopefully learned a little bit about the transition into Medicare and what to expect as you approach that, whether for the first time or for your initial and subsequent open enrollments throughout your retirement. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next on next week's podcast. Thank you. Bye.